Welcome to Gen Z Hoops, the Gen Z basketball, coaching, and sports business show. On this podcast, you'll learn from professional players, coaches, and executives from all over the world and see the court in a brand new way. And now, joining you courtside, your Gen Z host, John Hartofilis.
Coach Cam, good morning. What's going on?
Good morning. How you doing?
Doing great. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's gonna be a lot of fun to kind of jump into all the cool stuff you've been doing. And kind of just unpack your journey up to this point and kind of where you're at. So I'm curious, maybe just to jump right into the show, like what was the starting point really for your passion for the game? Like where did that really come from? What made you realize that basketball is what you really wanted to do?
Well, it came from my father. He played basketball in Columbus. He also went to Cumberland College, which was in Kentucky. And from there, he continued to coach basketball, girls and boys, at our high school in Kent, Ohio. My mom also played basketball in high school as well. And just growing up around the game, watching the games. My dad tells a story all the time of him sitting there watching Jordan with me and my brother in both of his arms. So that's kind of how we grew up, just playing basketball outside every day. And that's kind of what sparked my interest.
That's so cool. And I'm curious, maybe when playing, maybe at one point when you're playing all this time, made you really realize that the transition to coaching is what you really wanted to do. And that to be like that whole lifetime of coaching for you after you were done playing. But what point was that where you realized that that's what you wanted to do?
Yeah, well, I kind of knew I wanted to coach my whole life at some point when I got done playing. Kind of the thing that did it for me was coming out of college. I was third in block shots in our school history, but I didn't average a lot of points or anything like that. So I signed an agent, and it came back with some offers overseas for, $20,000 for 10 months and things like that. And I was just in communication with all the coaches that recruited me, and I let all of them know as well that I wanted to coach. And one school that got back to me was University of Akron, and they offered me a grad assistantship to come there and help coach as well, get a free master's degree. So I kind of went that route instead of going to play.
That's super interesting, and because it's a decision or something that a lot of people have to face, right? They're done playing, and they could play overseas, but they don't know what that would look like. Right? There's a lot of uncertainty there. Or they could stay, go to grad school, and be a grad assistant. So I'm curious, maybe if you can go into maybe what your responsibilities were there, what that role was like as a grad assistant in the day to day. It's a career path that a lot of people, young coaches especially, tend to take.
Hey, Akron is a great time there. Coach Keith Danbrow is a great coach. A lot of good coaches there as well. Doing a lot of ground level work. So one of the main things I did, because I was 1 year out of college, was practice. Like every day, full court, practice with the team. Whenever they have enough guys to practice, I was practicing. Individual workouts, I was playing defense. So, and then also got some time to work with those guys on the side as well. And then in the office, just helping with schoolwork, printing things out. I mean, even things like going to grab the coach's lunch and put gas in the coach's car. Like any responsibility there is what you have to do if you want to work your way up.
Definitely. So then obviously I noticed the really cool thing was right after a year of doing grad assistant, you got that call to the next step, going to the NBA with the Atlanta Hawks. And I'm really curious about what that transition looked like, because it's not often where obviously someone super young makes that jump right so quickly. And I'm curious as a grad assistant, maybe what kind of prepared you to make that leap and what it looked like there.
What kind of prepared me to make that leap was just a full life of basketball from early on up until that point. It's funny, like the game really never changes that much. Like from middle school to high school, like the speed will change and the skill level will change, the talent level for sure. But at the end of the day, basketball is kind of just basketball. So that's what kind of prepared me for that jump. But kind of going back to that, I was going to start my second year at Akron. Got a call from assistant coach at Bowling Green, where I went to school at. He said that the Hawks were looking for a big guy to help out in the video room. I sent the email, sent my resume and all that. Had a couple phone interviews. And then I flew down there on a Friday. They flew me down, helped with the workout, an interview with some of the coaches. And they had somebody take me back to the airport. And when I got back to the airport, I got a call saying I got the job. So that was kind of one of the crazy experiences in my life. Basketball fan and player, when you go in there, Coach Bud is in there and you have so many great players like Horford, Paul Millsap, Jeff T, Dennis Schroeder, Kyle Korver, just a whole bunch of great players. You're kind of starstruck when you go in there, because at the time I was 22 years old. It's like, I was just playing 2K, watching with these guys the other day, and now I'm kind of in the gym with them. So it was kind of a great experience.
Oh, God, definitely so cool, and it's surreal to kind of imagine being in that room. And a lot of listeners may forget that. So you went there. It was September 2015, but that year you were about to go into was the year when you guys won 60 games and had an incredible regular season. I'm curious, maybe even before that. Obviously, that season was great, and there was a lot of, I imagine, great basketball played in Atlanta. But in terms of what you were doing, I'm curious because you're only 22, which is at that time, in a role like that, working with an NBA team is fantastic. I'm curious. Obviously, you did some player development there too, and that's something normally. Obviously, NBA staffs are so big; they have multiple video guys, multiple play, and right, everything's kind of spaced out, and people have their own lane. You were kind of doing a little bit of both, so that's what I'm super curious about, and how that worked, especially with someone so young that they kind of gave you the reins to do so much.
Well, my role there, I was player development. I wasn't a player development coach. I was a player development assistant. So what I did was I worked with the player development coaches on kind of ways to get those guys better, whether it was like taking shot charts or finding film. But mainly that job consisted of being on the court with the guys, kind of having to guard those guys every day when they're shooting, put a hand in their face. And, kind of the whole time when you're there as an assistant, a young guy, you just kind of taking mental notes and you're going back to the office and you're writing down workouts and things that you saw. So that one day when you have the opportunity, you can kind of replicate and do those things.
Oh my God, I mean, definitely. And I would imagine that time with the Hawks, right, there was so, right, whether it's the winning games part of it, whether it's what you were doing day in, day out with the team must have been super cool. And then from the NBA, obviously, wearing so many hats with the NBA team at such a young age is something super rare. But I'm curious as to maybe how that helped you when you went to the G League, right, with the Erie BayHawks. Now you're an assistant coach, right, doing in a bigger role in that sense, but also kind of just having all that experience from when you were with the Hawks. So what did that transition kind of going from the Hawks to the BayHawks? It's kind of funny, right? You kind of sticking with that theme of the Hawks. What did it look like for you?
Well, the thing about going to the Atlanta Hawks was, but prior to that time, especially at Akron, all I was really doing was playing against people, using my size to play in practice and that type of thing. But when I got to the Hawks, I learned how to use sports code and do video work. So I was able to help out with scouts and help the coaches put scouting reports together. And that's kind of the biggest thing that, and along with the workouts, like I mentioned before, and helping out in practice. So when I went to the BayHawks, I kind of already had an idea how to do all that stuff as far as like put my own scouting reports together, run drills in practice. But then I just had to kind of make it my own, So you learn from some of those great coaches over there. I mean, Coach Bud was there. Taylor Jenkins was there, who's at Memphis now. Kenny Atkinson, who's formerly the coach of the Brooklyn Nets. Darvin Ham, just so many great coaches. And you learn from them. But when you take an opportunity like that, goes to the G League, you kind of have to find your own way to do those things. So that was kind of what was so great about that experience.
Definitely, with much smaller staff, you definitely have to find your own way to do that. I'm curious, maybe you were talking about a lot of the sports code stuff you're doing. What kind of software you use? Like, can you kind of walk us through maybe how that stuff on the back end really comes to life?
So Sports Code is a very great program. Typically, most teams use it on the Mac computer, but what you're really doing is you're taking a full game of raw film and you're kind of just breaking it down possession by possession. And that's kind of how I started off doing it and learning the process because I really never done it before. But as you go by possession and possession, then you go into which shot came in that possession and who took that shot and where that shot came from. You're going through on the computer, you're labeling all these things and you're going back and you're looking at, okay, this is where this player likes to get their shot from, or this is what this player does most to be successful. And you're taking those clips and putting those into a personnel edit. And that's where the players before the game or prior to the game, they go in and see, okay, this is where this guy likes to get their shots, things like that. And you're also, as a coach, you're noticing trends. So I recognize this set, I recognize that set. I'm going to put those together and find the best clips to show the team. And then when we go to the floor, I'm going to walk through those clips with the team. So that process is probably my favorite process. It's very tough process. It takes, hours and hours to get that stuff done. You're coding sometimes 4, 5, 6 games for a team, but that's also my favorite process because it's just that work and then that finished product when you go in front of the team and you get to explain to them what's going on. You go out in the court, even more during the game when you're sitting there and you kind of recognize the sets and you're calling them out. And then when the player comes to the sideline, you're telling them, we watched that clip in film and where that player's supposed to go. So it's really that technical part that I really love about coaching.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. And thank you for going into such detail about how that really comes to life. Definitely something that's super informative for me, for our listeners who may have to do that in the future. And it's incredible to kind of think about what, someone in your position at the time was actually doing. I'm curious, so we didn't really touch on it too much. Obviously, I've brought up many times about how young you are, because that's, with the theme of the show is just what's so incredible is your young coaches in that setting, in that industry, given the chance and kind of taking advantage of it. I'm curious, maybe because being so young, right, being 24, 25 at the time, right, a lot of these guys in the G League are your age, if not older, if not considerably older than you. What does that dynamic look like? Because obviously, so for me, I'm coaching, right? I'm 20 years old. My players are pretty close to me in age. And that's something I think a lot of young coaches can relate to, because that's just who you're coaching. But what did that look like for you in really building that relationship and kind of using your ages to an advantage to kind of get really close to your players, but also have that boundary of you still have to keep it professional?
It's a challenging process, and sometimes, when I got to Erie with the BayHawks, I was 25 years old, and some of the players were in their 30s, but also some of the players were younger than me and the same age. So it's just one of those things where, it's kind of a tough question, but you just go through the process where you're trying to be their friend, and you kind of show them that you can help them get better. And it's also one of those things where you mention something to help them on the court, and when they do it, they kind of gain your respect. And especially during scouting reports, whether it's your scout or somebody else's scout, and they may ask a question about a play, and you know what you're talking about. So it's really just being on your toes and knowing what's going on to gain their respect.
I'm curious, right, with being so close to them in age, maybe what did that look like in terms of maybe with a specific player and really getting a strong relationship and maybe having that advantage as a coach to get so close and get the best out of a player?
Going back to the days of Atlanta Hawks, I was 22 at the time. I believe maybe I was 23, but Dennis Schroeder was a year younger than me. And just going through the scouting reports, sometimes the guys are goofing off a little bit and they didn't hear what was going on or where they should be. And they might lean over and say, hey, what was this play, or what was this number, or where should I be? And you can tell them real quick. And that's kind of how I built my relationship with the younger player, just knowing what's going on. And those little things turn into, I'm going to the gym to shoot tonight. Can you come shoot with me? And that rebounding in the gym at late night turns to, can we do this workout or can we work on something? And that's kind of how you gain respect to the younger players.
Well, that's huge. And thank you for that specific example, because it really does paint the picture of what that might look like for a young coach in the NBA or any other league really in the world. Thinking about then, obviously, going right after that to the Grand Rapids Drive, right, to the Detroit Pistons G League team. Did your role with the Grand Rapids Drive kind of change from what you're doing with the Erie BayHawks? What did that really look like for you?
I was pretty much the same role, assistant coach in the G League. When I was in Atlanta, Malik Rose was in that front office, and I was helping them out with draft stuff and draft prep and all that stuff. And he took the job with the Erie BayHawks as the GM there, and then he also from there went to Detroit with their team. So he brought me on there, and that was pretty much the same kind of role. But the one thing is that every team does things differently, So the video, how they edit film will change, how you present scouts will change. And that was the only thing I had to really get adjusted to.
Oh, definitely. I'm curious. So you brought up the G League draft, and it's something that maybe a lot of people don't really understand. And I've had when Nick Lages came on the show, he obviously does a lot of draft. He does everything maybe for the South Bay Lakers, and we kind of went in a little bit in depth on kind of how that process works. But there were still a lot of questions left unanswered, really, because there's just so many intricate details in that process. Can you kind of talk about maybe your role? Because the G League draft is maybe so different from the NBA draft in terms of what you guys were looking for and how that kind of whole process kind of plays out.
Yeah, well, the G League draft is really an interesting draft because, some of the guys, they don't play, high-level D1. Some guys play D2. Some guys come from overseas. So what the GM normally will do is kind of give you a list of, the top 40 or 50 guys that he wants to look at for a certain position. And what we do is we go into certain programs. What we do is we just watch film, keep watching film and evaluate and kind of figuring out who's the best prospect for that position. We pick our top 5 prospects and then hand them over to the GM and head coach. And then they will kind of go and decide from there.
Oh, it's really cool thinking about that role in the G League and preparing that. So I'm curious, maybe looking at maybe everything in its totality. I'm curious, right? Still being a super young coach, but obviously having that experience of kind of being thrown in the fire and doing things in that way. What's some advice, maybe it wasn't too long ago, but that you would give yourself maybe when you were a grad assistant in terms of how to maybe handle yourself once you would get to the league in a year and what kind of would be best to make you the best coach you could be that now that maybe you kind of knew them, but didn't fully understand?
Cherishing every moment a little bit more. I was pretty active as a coach, very attentive, but there's so many things that you can pick up from some of those great coaches. So probably get in their office more and asking more questions, kind of figure out, their journey, or kind of how you're doing with this podcast, but just figuring out more details, more information, because some of those things that I probably could have or should have asked could have helped propel me to the next level.
I mean, 100%. And that's really good advice in thinking about how you really could navigate that whole process and just going through everything, right? You've worn so many different hats. You've done so many different things. It's so cool to kind of think about what a young coach really could do in the industry. And really want to appreciate and thank you for coming on. And I can't wait to see what's next for you. Really excited for it.
No, thanks. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Gen Z Hoops. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all major social media platforms at Gen Z Hoops. You can tune in and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and every other podcast platform on the planet. Get ready for the next episode.